Hello, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topic for tonight is the fish rots from the head, or at least our topic for this live stream. There will be another live stream at 9 p.m. But this particular live stream is about the fish rotting from the head. So, this is based on an article, or at least takes off from an article, with a slightly different of the title. I'm sharing the screen now, and we'll put up the article. We'll share the article. And the title of that article is "The Fish Stinks from the Head." So my title is a little different. It's by Harold Meyerson, written on October 13th. And it's about the January 6th committee subpoenaing Donald Trump. And more generally, it's about what the January 6th committee has done and what the significance of it is in relation to what may now be done to Donald J. Trump. Here's a picture of Vice Chair Representative Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, speaking as the January 6th committee holds a hearing on Capitol Hill on October 13th, 2022. Harold Morrison, by the way, is he's been around for a very long time. I don't know if he's near my age, but I suspect he is. He's a labor man, and his columns over the years have been largely on labor affairs. But he's been with the American Prospect for a very long time. He's an institution over there. He's a very good columnist. Now, he starts off his piece by saying, from its inception, the House Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol has quite properly not confined itself simply to the mob's violent crimes on that day in and around the Capitol. What the committee has done, rather brilliantly, says Harold, is place those crimes in the context of a larger plot to overturn the result of the presidential election and keep Donald Trump in power even though he lost, and to identify said Trump as instigator of the plot. That's pretty well put, isn't it? And to identify said Trump as instigator of the plot. Though the testimony of as many as 1,000 witnesses, including Trump's White House aides, his top campaign officials, his top Justice Department staffers, Republican politicians in swing states, whom he urged to fake the numbers, also officials in law enforcement agencies, outside aides and hangers-on in Trump world, and even some of his children, the committee has made a highly persuasive case that Trump had planned to claim victory months before Election Day, that he indeed claimed victory on an after-election day, even though he privately admitted that he knew he'd lost. Not only did he deliberately continue his deception right up to January 6th, indeed, he is continuing it to this very day. But he summoned a violent mob to D.C. and loosed it on the Capitol, knowing full well many in that mob were armed to the teeth. Yes, in fact, he was told by someone that the people in the mob were armed, and he said, well, that's okay. They're not going to harm me. That's what he said. So, much of Thursday's hearing trod over already covered ground. Some new details, however, strengthened the committee's case. Detail one was the revelation that just 1 week after the election, Trump ordered the Defense Department to withdraw all U.S. forces from Afghanistan and Somalia by January 15th, so he could claim to have ended those interventions before his presidency ended. The ancillary message the committee was putting out, of course, is that if you think Biden's Afghan withdrawal was precipitous, you should have seen what Trump ordered, which defense officials resolutely ignored. Detail 2 came closer to what makes Trump tick than anything the committee has previously revealed. In this case, it was a new snippet of testimony from Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' assistant, Cassidy Hutchinson, who was discussing Trump's rage at the Supreme Court's refusal to hear his case on December 11th, 3 days before the states confirmed their electoral voters. On that date, Cassidy testified. In the midst of his tirade, Trump walked by Meadows and Cassidy and told them, Hutchinson said, I, quote, I don't want people to know we lost. This is embarrassing, unquote. So he knew he lost, but it was embarrassing, so he just didn't want to admit it. Carl Morrison says, embarrassing. The underlying mission of today's Republican Party is that to acknowledge Trump's defeat would embarrass him. And rather than do that, the constitutional order, such as it is, needs to be overturned. When it comes to a choice between the peaceful transfer of power and saving Donald Trump from embarrassment, the one-time party of Lincoln opts for shielding the Donald's tender ego. That was beautifully put. Beautifully put. Detail 3 was a little more from the recorded conversation Trump had with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Actually, it's Raffensperger, not Burger, Perger, in which he implored Raffensperger to find just enough votes for Trump to carry that state. Quote, I need 11,000 votes, unquote, Trump said. Quote, give me a break, unquote. It seems to me that wasn't the exact quote. Wasn't the exact quote, I need 11,781 votes? Does anybody remember? I'm pretty sure that figure sticks in my mind for some reason. That's what he said to Raffensperger. 11,781 votes. Quote, there's the will of the electorate and there's Trump's need for a break, lest heaven forfend he be embarrassed. That was really brilliantly put, that part. Detail 4 was a host of email and other messages among Secret Service agents and other security agencies detailing their advanced knowledge of just how violent January 6th would be, and that White House officials were privy to these messages. Fortunately, many of those who brought guns planned to use them only if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act, which they wrongly believed would have given them legal sanction to start shooting. Detail 5 came from a testimony of a presidential security agent who recalled how the security detail was, quote, in a state of shock about Trump's insistence as the insurrectionists surged around and into the Capitol that he go there as well to lead the mob he'd sent. Detail 6 was previously unheard question and answer sequence in which Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, was asked by Representative Liz Cheney about the many people who urged Trump to tell the mob to leave the Capitol. Quote, who in the whole House, unquote, she asked, quote, didn't want those people to leave the Capitol, unquote. Cipollone paused and then said, I can't think of anybody on staff who didn't want them to leave. Then Cheney asked him about whether Trump did, to which Cipollone, as Trump's lawyer, said he couldn't answer that. So everyone on Trump's staff, not to mention Trump's kids, cabinet members, the military, members of Congress from both parties, Fox News hosts et al., pleaded with him to call the mob off. Only Trump thought that was a bad idea. Of course, only Trump couldn't bear the embarrassment of losing, and as there was no one else who could summon the violence that might spare him the humiliation of losing, he was sticking to his or his mob's guns. I alone can fix the election, he must have thought. The committee concluded today's hearing by voting to subpoena the former president, thereby upsetting both Trump, who surely will refuse to appear, and Attorney General Merrick Garland, who now must decide whether to prosecute Trump for blowing off the subpoena. Worse yet, Garland must decide before the next Congress, which has a 69% chance of being Republican according to 538, convenes in January and abolishes the committee, rendering the subpoena moot. To descend into the crassly political, that's in my job description. Should Garland decide to prosecute him before the midterms, he might drive more Trump fanatics to the polls. Then again, he might drive more Trump critics to the polls, too. Poor Merrick. That's Attorney General Garland, of course. If only the state of American democracy didn't depend on his executing the law. Of course, it does depend on that. But to make certain comments on this, to make my point, the committee has now led not only to the uncovering of evidence that certainly points to the guilt of Trump if he's indicted for the insurrection, but has also led Trump to the point where he refuses to appear. He will have committed a crime if he blows the subpoena off. So the committee has boxed in Garland in a number of ways. And Garland must indict. He ought to decide to indict, to prosecute, and to indict before the midterms. Yes, he might drive more Trump fanatics to the polls. But I think the Trump fanatics have already been driven to the polls. You're not going to get any more of them than you have now out to the polls. On the other hand, you might drive more Trump critics, especially Republican critics, to the polls too. And that should be what you want to do, because that should certainly have an impact on the Republican Party, and not a positive impact as well. So, in my view, that's what Garland ought to decide. He ought to prosecute before the midterms. The midterms should not be seen as providing some kind of invulnerability shield to Donald Trump. We all know, I know it's dangerous to say, we all know, but if we saw any of the committee's hearings, if we read anything about the committee's hearings, if we went into any of the details that Harold has summarized here in this particular article, then we all know that Trump actually planned this insurrection, that he did everything he could to make this insurrection happen. I think it's fair to say that he was the leader of the insurrection, and that the evidence actually shows that, and that it is incumbent on the Attorney General of the United States to enforce the law, not to dilly-dally about it. Not to dilly-dally about it. If the enforcement results in pointing out to people, making clear to people that the Republican Party itself was in on the insurrection, which they apparently were, certainly when it came to supporting it with their votes in the House, since that is so clear, they should not be saved from the midterm consequences of their actions. Let the critics come out. Let the critics vote. Let the consequences be realized. The one-time party of Lincoln is no longer the party of Lincoln. It is the party of Trump. It is the party of out and out fascism, rather than the party of submerged fascism, which is probably the other party. It's the party of out and out fascism. Let them be judged for that during the November 8th election. During the period from now till November 8th, when people are already casting their vote, make it clear to them that they may be casting their vote for a party of insurrection. Let them come to terms with that in their own minds. Let them not have any rationalizations. Let them look in the mirror and act accordingly. That is what I think. Do any of my friends differ? Hi, Lana. Thank you for coming to Facebook, and thank you for coming to YouTube. I'm surprised that it's just you and me. So, okay, unless you have some comments, then I am going to close this rather short stream, and I will be back, okay, at 9 p.m. And at 9 p.m., I will be discussing with Lisa, I hope. But at this point, I am not entirely certain. But I will be discussing putting the Supreme Court in its place. And I think that will certainly be a very good topic for the 9 p.m. show. So thank you for coming. And hopefully I will see you then. Oh, there's Russ. Hi, Russ. How you doing? Yeah, Lana says people are not used to you at this time. I know it won't be a regular time for me either. The way the timing of these works is that when news arises, then I do an update. So it doesn't work exactly that way, but somewhat that way. Okay, in this case, this was a convenient time for me to do an update, so I did it. Russ asks, Joe, is there a spectrum, okay, of fascism? Uh, I don't know if I would use the model of spectrum. Okay, if you're asking, are some political systems more fascist than other political systems? Is there kind of a thermometer of fascism? I think the thermometer might be a better analogy than the spectrum. Oh, of course, you might be thinking whether there's an ideological spectrum of fascism. So there are right fascists, and there are left fascists, and there are centrist fascists. Well, if you're talking in terms of the ideology, okay, of fascism, uh, that represents a particular cluster, okay, of characteristics. And that cluster is what it is. Okay, a cluster of characteristics, okay, of communism would be different from a cluster of characteristics, okay, of fascism. Those clusters would probably share some things in common. But the class basis of those two forms of totalitarianism would certainly be different. The class interests that those two things would be representing would also be different. Our centrists, I'm not sure why you put in density there, Russell. Our centrist density a form of fascism? But fascism actually most generally is an ideology that represents the centrists. Okay, it's an ideology that represents the business interests, the corporate interests, and in that sense, okay, it's economically centrist. Now, some people used to say back in the 1950s that uh, there were three forms, okay, of authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And that one form uh, was a form that favored the small number, okay, of rich people, uh, more generally the aristocrats, the old style, okay, of aristocrats, the landed gentry. And they used to say that the classic example of that was in Spain, where Franco really didn't create a totalitarian state. It was a highly authoritarian state, okay, but it attempted to keep the population as passive, okay, as possible. Did not attempt to mobilize the population in favor of the state, okay, in back of the state. That was contrasted with fascism, the fascism of Mussolini, and the fascism of Hitler, Nazism. Those two were characterized as representing businesses and the corporations, the military, okay, of course. Okay, in Mussolini's case, the church was involved, though of course the Pope was never himself a fascist, okay, in that sense. But it was clear that in Mussolini's regime, the church people had a very respected sort of position, and the importance of Catholicism was emphasized in that fascist regime. Um, on the other hand, um, when we got to the Nazis, though the class basis in the representation of business was the same, okay, and in the representation of the military was the same, uh, when it came to religion, there was a weird form of it that was glorified by the Nazis, basically going back to the mythological heathenism uh, that was practiced before the advent, okay, of Christianity. The churches were not particularly looked upon in a favorable way. And of course, one kind of church, the churches of the Jews, of course, were oppressed in a very positive way. But Both Nazi form of totalitarianism and the fascism, okay, of Mussolini and the other fascisms, okay, in Europe, try to mobilize the population, particularly the middle class and parts of the working class, to be actively in support of the state. That's why it was called totalitarianism, because the state was mobilizing people in a continual form of activist support, okay, of the state authorities. So that was the kind of characterization that was prevalent actually during the 1950s and during a part of the 1960s. So that kind of characterization envisioned a spectrum of totalitarianism where the communists were left totalitarians, the Nazis and the fascists were centrist totalitarians, okay, and the rightists weren't exactly totalitarians, okay, at all. The Franco regime was simply looked upon as a thoroughgoing kind of authoritarian regime. So that's the way we looked at things when I was in undergraduate school and in graduate school. There was a particular book, specifically Political Man by Seymour Martin Lipset, that was probably the first to write about this kind of characterization, but it became quite common in the 50s and 60s to look at things in this way. Now, our views of fascism are increasingly complex because we still recognize the Mussolini kind, okay, of fascism, which Trumpism appears to closely approach. But there's also another kind of totalitarianism, which is called inverted totalitarianism, which was identified by Sheldon Wallen during the 1990s and 2000s. He never did quite call that a form, okay, of fascism, but it seems to be very close to the kind of system that we have in America today. And there are a lot of that, quite a lot of us who consider that a form, okay, of fascism. Russ says he's losing his signal. Kay says, hi all, sorry I'm late. Lana says, two demerits, Kay. And Kay says, laugh out loud, Lana. Okay, well, you're not really too late. I went on at 5:30, and it's now 6:09 or so. But unless there are further questions, I am just about ready to say goodnight for this particular stream. I do want to say, however, that I'll be back at 9 p.m. and my topic at 9 p.m. will be putting the Supreme Court in its place. And the 9 p.m. show will be the main show of the day. I expect and hope that Lisa will be here for that show. But I haven't heard from her in some time, and she owes me a call, so I'm not sure what went down with her today at this point. But I will certainly be there at 9 p.m., and I am still expecting her to join me and to help me to host that particular show. In fact, I am looking forward to it. So thank you for coming. And hopefully I will see you again at 9 p.m. So good evening for now, and I'll see you later.